Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It is once again time for the internet's favorite movie centric list making podcast. It is 10 to 1, and I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined with me, as always, by that person that also does lists, Jen.
Wow. I guess that is an introduction.
Yes.
It's a yeah, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. Yes, I am the other human on the podcast, Jen. Um, uh, Josh, before we start today, let me ask you, how was your day? How was your day?
Let's see. It was not bad, I guess. Not bad. I'll go with not bad. How was your day?
My day was so crazy, so chaotic that I am back in my PJs. That's how crazy and chaotic my day has been. Yeah, so I'm excited to be here because this is my sort of trying to think of a good word for this that doesn't sound ridiculous, but this is my
Zen.
yes, there we go. That's a great word. This is my Zen hour or hours as we sort of run over. And I always feel so cocooned in purpose and intent when I'm here. And I have to say that this week's list today seems like a perfect perfect segue into because if I could choose any day for a time traveler to come back and disrupt everything that's happened today, today would be a really good day for that. I know that it's almost over and I have little chance of it happening, but just thought I'd throw that out into the universe just in case anybody's listening. So today we are going to talk about time travel movies, movies that take place or at least have origins in the future where they come back in time and do things. Who knows what they do?
Hmm.
I've had some really interesting conversations around the movies that we chose this week, with everything from what about the paradox thing to maybe paradoxes don't exist? Haven't we all seen Loki? Really interesting stuff has come out of this. So I feel like this was a really good choice, and I can't wait to kind of dig into some of these movies. They definitely run the gamut on my side. I mean, we've got everything from kind of futuristic, really hype and crazy to wow, did that really happen? And yeah, so I'm excited also to see what you've got. Are you excited?
I'm not so sure excited is the word because I'm gonna go ahead and let you know that there is maybe an item or two. I took a couple of liberties, and I it's not like I was, boldly trying to break the rules or anything. It's just with the specifications for the list being so, tight, I had to dig a little deep to make sure that, things sort of qualified.
Well,
And
we give credit here for proper intent, and we don't shame people on this podcast. So if you tried, um, I'm pretty sure that we can make sure. I'm sure that every movie that you talk about, it will have something to say about it. It's gonna be fine. It's all gonna be good.
I did kind of
As long
when I
as
was going on my
Bill and Ted
letterbox,
are not on your list, then we're good. Then that's great.
almost, but only through a very tiny technicality. But I was like, that's even too much of a stretch for me because Rufus, he's from the future.
My God. All right. All right. Well, let's dig into it. Who wants to start? Do you want to start? You want me to start? What do you want to do?
Well, I'll tell you this: my first 4 or 5, uh, I'm a real quick in and out.
Okay.
So if you want me to start, I can.
Yes, be my guest. Let's see what you got.
All right. My number 10 for what I call time travel, but future origins, if that makes sense. Kitty
It does.
disagrees with me already.
Yeah, nope, you got it.
Okay. Um, Back to the Future Part 2.
Okay.
Now, I know what you're thinking, but Josh, the movie starts in 1985 and then goes to the future 2015 before going back to 1955. You certainly don't mean to count Doc and Marty going from 2015 to 1955. You know, it goes back and forth, but we're not really going to get into the whole nitty gritty of it. But as far as that being the back to the past from the future, no, 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 no. I did pull a little technicality because there is a time traveler in that movie that does go back in time just in one direction.
That's
Biff.
right. Biff does, doesn't he?
Biff steals the DeLorean, goes
That's
back to
right.
his younger self, gives him Gray's Sports Almanac, and creates the, uh, I guess the what would the term be now? Created the variant,
Yeah.
Biff. I just
Yep.
kind of want to see the show Loki pull a Deadpool. We go to the Back to the Future part. We have to prune this timeline.
Biff is a variant.
So yeah, that's it. That's Biff goes back in time and Back to the Future Part 2. Back to the Future is a series that gets talked about a lot by me specifically. So I'm not going to expand really anymore. That's my number 10.
Hey, that really does work. And kudos for coming up with that because, yeah, you're right. I didn't even think about that. So that was good. I'm impressed. Um, all right. Well, let me start with um my I, you know I wasn't a huge fan of this movie when it came out. um Although I will say that it has grown on me a little bit. This is a film that was adapted from a science fiction novel called Immortality Incorporated. And the person who wrote it was a guy named Robert Sheckley. And I had never actually read this. It was surprising that I hadn't read it because I used to be a voracious reader of science fiction back in the day, and I can't believe I missed this. But I hadn't read this novel beforehand, and I thought, well, I'll go back and read it and kind of see what this was all about. And I really enjoyed the book. It was a really good book. It almost seems a little backwards now based on the kind of technology that we have. So, a lot of times when you go back and read science fiction from the 1950s or 60s, it feels kind of like almost hokey, right? Because we now have in our hands firmly the technology that maybe they were writing about, and it doesn't feel like, there's no way that kind of technology doesn't work. But the premise of this really does carry through. So the name of the movie is called Free Jack. Now, in Free Jack, they basically have this super wealthy class of people who get to their immortality goals by hiring people called bone jackers. And they're basically mercenaries that get time travel devices and they snatch people from the past just before they die. And they use their bodies. So the people who escape, they're known as basically free jacks. And they're considered not human and under the societal law. So you've got this sort of really weird society that's running around where you've got replacement bodies, and you have people that are basically trying to use uh the the past as a way to keep themselves immortal. It's kind of a crazy concept. So one of the things that I really didn't like about this movie was how ridiculous it felt. It it I don't know, there was something about it that just made me feel like, okay, this is dumb. Why would people do this? I mean, wouldn't we just keep investing in proper technology to make people live longer? But, the older that I get, the more I realize, no, no, actually, I think if we could do this, this is something we would do. This is definitely one of those, down the rabbit hole, but hey, if it worked, I could totally see us creating this kind of dystopian society around which all these things happen. Now, the one thing about Free Jacks that I think is was kind of interesting, um, was almost everybody in the future is suffering from one kind of ailment or another. Um, there is so much uh, environmental bad stuff happening, more than just global warming. I mean, we basically like poisoned the entire air and it's bad. And everybody is on drugs. So there is a kind of drugs like operatively not drugs that make you, feel better necessarily, drugs that kind of, make you feel as if it doesn't matter. So just important little thing there. And there is a kind of, stark bleakness about it, and there's also this idea that the future is so dark and so awful that it requires people to come back into the past in order to get what they need. And that's the part of the movie that I actually kind of liked. I like the idea that's sort of where they've run out of resources to the point where now they have to invent a way to get things that they need, and they can only do it by going into the past. The other thing about this movie, which I will say that I didn't like, and is gets really complicated, is like most time travel movies. One, there's no explanation of the actual time travel, which is a pain in the neck when you have to sort of quantify what's going on. But the second thing is this movie is all over the map. There is a million things going on. There are so many different subplots, most of which never really get resolved. There's a lot of characters, and the characters I will say are good. We've got Emilio Estevez, Mick Jagger, Rene Rousseau, Anthony Hopkins, Jonathan Banks, and who's the other one in this that I thought was super cool? There's somebody else in this is super cool. But I mean, like that's a fairly good cast. Emilio Estevez, especially for 1992. Emilio Estevez, Mick Jagger, Rene Russo, Anthony Hopkins. Like, you've got some star power going on, and it it had potential, but it just didn't really go where I think they wanted it to go. It felt really it fell flat. It fell so flat. So when you watch it, one, it's a time travel movie. You got to kind of just skip over anything that you think needs to make sense. And two, um be careful with this one. It's not all it's sort of hyped up to be. However, the book is. Immortality Incorporated is actually really good. So, my number 10, Free Jack.
I think I might have seen this when I was like 8.
Ugh, I'm so sorry.
So no, I have no idea what's going on
I
in
mean,
it.
I chose it because it was a really good representation of the future coming back into the past for time travel, but it is number 10 because it is truly awful. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all. It's just all over the movie map. Have you ever seen movies like that where it's just like, what am I even watching?
You're talking to
That's
the
what
guy
this
that bought
is.
tickets to Neil Breen movies.
Oh, good lord. Yeah. See, there you go. There you go.
Know a thing or two about that.
Oh my god. Sometimes when I think back on this movie, it just gives me an absolute headache. But the book was really good, and it's amazing that what they pulled out of this was what they did. I mean, Free Jack is actually that there's it. It feels like, yeah, that is the right premise to work with, but the they really bastardized the whole idea in the book, and man, this is one of those adaptations which just nope, nope, nope. You need to read the book.
Okay, well,
All right.
maybe I will.
Yeah, read the book, don't watch the movie. I mean, that's like the first time
I
I
was going
think
to
I've
say, do
ever
you
said
think it's
that, but
something that maybe I shouldn't? I shouldn't be revisiting after all
no,
these years.
and also just as an aside, I think it like has 25% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, like it's so bad.
Okay, okay. Uh, well, not to shove off of your wonderful pick. Um, we are going to move on to my number 9,
Number
which
9.
is going to last all of maybe 30 seconds
All right.
because, like I said, these, this bottom of my list is stuff that I don't feel super comfortable breaking down. This one in particular, because it says I saw it on my letterboxed uh, watch list, and it said I gave it 4.5 stars,
Mm,
which is, an amazing rating, 4.5 out of 5.
yeah.
The only problem is I have no recollection of this movie at all,
Oh no.
and that is 2012's Looper.
Oh, hey. Ding 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 ding. We have actually same movie, same spot. So I will talk about this movie.
Okay, so then here's what's going to happen. I'm going to say Looper's my number 9, and Jen, why don't you go ahead and take over?
All right. Okay, so Looper is also, honestly, a weird sort of premise. It also has a fairly good cast. We've got Bruce Willis, we've got uh Josh Gordon-Levitt, we've got Emily Blunt. I mean, it was pretty good. Um, it now y- th- to understand what Looper is about, you have to understand that anytime you're dealing with organized crime and time travel, there's always going to be kind of a weird disconnect, right? Which I feel like this movie does have. Um, and also, much like Free Jack, uh, the idea of the human body comes into play. Okay, because what do organized criminals want? They want to get rid of bodies without anybody knowing who it was that killed them. I mean, they want like the perfect undetectable crime. So, what they do is they send their enemies, this crime syndicate sends their enemies back in time, and they send them back in time to be executed. So, you know, here comes the paradox thinking, but this is sort of the thing where they send the enemy back in time, they kill those younger selves, and that's what they call closing the loop. Okay, and um and then that ends basically the contract out on them. um Now, it doesn't, the movie follows someone who doesn't close the loop. Okay, they escape, and so now you've got something happening that is highly, it's difficult to even explain, sort of like where all of the logic can kind of come in, because some of this stuff doesn't make any sense. But basically old person and new person have to kind of battle some stuff out. There's some sort of interesting weird stuff that happens in this which I kind of liked. But then there's also some things that didn't make any sense whatsoever, like, if you kill a younger version of a person, even if you know what happens to them, um there's problems. There's gonna be problems because you don't know how many people's lives they've touched during the time that they were alive. So even if you think, well, he wasn't a Nobel Prize winner or anything, you have no idea whether, that person gave $50 to somebody on the street and that turned into some radical business idea. I mean, like, literally society would be changing every single day because each time that they brought somebody back, or each time that they killed somebody by going back in time, yeah, things would start shifting. So there was that problem with it, but otherwise it was actually a really good action movie. There was a lot of, like, interesting personal drama happening here. So I did really like it. I will say that one of the things that I also liked is that they sort of treat the past as being like this sort of provincial place where they have to, deal with like less than they normally deal with. So how are we going to be able to do it? And of course, for us, that's like state of the art stuff. So I did sort of like that. I thought that was treated pretty well. Um, the end of this is kind of convoluted and a bit sad. Um, but more than sad, it's really convoluted. So if you do end up watching this movie, and I do actually suggest it, if you do watch this movie, just realize that, again, with the time travel, you have to sort of allow for things to happen which aren't going to make total sense. And I think that can be okay. It's definitely a good, solid action movie. So, Looper is also my number 9. Good choice, Josh.
I say the same to you, Jen.
Good movie. Very good movie. Liked it a lot.
It's not very often we cross over in the same spot.
Yeah, right. No kidding. It's not this I will say that also, just I'm on the Rotten Tomatoes kick for some reason. This movie has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I think the thing that people liked the most about it was they did put a lot of thought into both the use of time travel and some applications in the time travel that don't just sort of discount the fact that like this is a really difficult thing to do. And so I mean I feel like critics kind of gave it some credit for that. So I mean, but 93% is nothing to sneeze at. That's pretty good.
And yet I remember nothing.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
Well, I wonder if my number 8 is going to cross over with you at some point, because while it is, I believe, a good movie, it's still one of those where I saw it like around the time it was released and never again.
Oh wow.
But it also does. I'm kind of hitting a back-to-back Bruce Willis thing here, because my next uh, film, my number 8, is 12 Monkeys.
Oh yes, that definitely did make my list, although significantly in a different position.
Yeah, I thought it might. So I'm going to keep this uh, short. If you're not aware of what 12 Monkeys is, based on the movie or the TV series, I believe it was based you know around the same story. There is a deadly virus that hits the world, and people from the future send Bruce Willis back in time to figure it all out, try to stop it, as it were. And no, not a character either. He I believe he is just Bruce Willis. They're like, we got to send Bruce Willis back. The guy from the Die Hard movies. Oh wait, no, no, I'm reading here that he actually does play a character. Never mind. But I remember seeing it. It's directed by Terry Gilliam. Very atmospheric, very intense. Especially some of the scenes in the mental hospital. Those are the things that resonate and really strike a nerve that kind of hit and cemented a place in my long term memory. I wish I could say more about how everything came about and the evolution of the story, but unfortunately, I didn't. This is one of those movies that I kind of wanted to revisit prior to the show, but things get crazy, things get hectic, and things don't always wrap up the way you want, much like 12 Monkeys. See what I did there?
I see what you did there.
But luckily, I have a Jen to expound upon that a little bit later. So 12 Monkeys is my number 8.
That was a really good choice. And I will definitely tell you why I loved 12 Monkeys as we move up on the list a little bit. Um, okay, my number 8 is, oh boy, I hate to even bring this stupid movie up because I feel like it's so bad. Okay, but I'm going to bring it up because of the way that I feel like it kind of used time travel. And this is my one, I guess, sort of like cheat movie, if you will. Because we don't actually get a date for when it's supposed to have happened, when we're supposed to actually have been seeing these people. Like, there's no, I don't have a definitive time. So it could have been in the future a little bit. I don't know. Um, but honestly, I can tell you that this is a terrible movie. However, it is one of those movies that's like the best fan fiction idea of time travel that is sort of around. Um, and I say that because, look, I don't know if you ever read Archive of Our Own, but if you go to this website called Archive of Our Own, there are stories for every single kind of fiction that has ever sort of been addressed. And a lot of it has to do with whatever is in the zeitgeist. So, lots of series that have been produced get their own fan fiction revivals. Lots of movies get their own fan fiction addendums or rewrites. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas. And time travel as a tag is one of the weirdest and most eclectic that there is. People have very varied ideas about what time travel should look like. And I notice that there is a lot of the movie that I'm going to inject here, where you're where it's not very clear that the time travel is back in time or like an alternate universe construct. And at that point, when it's an alternate universe construct, time has no meaning. So you're not really experiencing going back in time. You're experiencing sort of jumping timelines, which, if you can wrap your head around that, call me because I'd love to have you explain it to me. It's difficult. Um, so the movie is called Waxwork 2 Lost in Time. Now, honestly, please don't run out and go see this movie. It truly is absolutely awful. But it is, again, a really good example, I think, of how to use time travel as sort of the quintessential, I want to do something, how can I do it? Oh, this. And it sort of uses a little bit of Deus Ex Machina as its propellant, if you will. But then it sort of stays a bit close to its own rules, like the rules of the universe for Waxwork to sort of stick together. There is this device that's called Solomon's Locket, and Solomon's Locket is basically it's supposed to come from this other place called Cartagra. And it's been used by both angels and devils. That's we find that kind of stuff out. And there's all of these different worlds that are sort of comprised inside or can be accessed using Solomon's Locket. So what happens is some of the fictional stories can become real, like Frankenstein, like Alien, Godzilla, Nosferatu, those kinds of places. And a lot like, what we have with the waxwork exhibits, just like the movie Waxwork, where the exhibits themselves become time portals and people can get pushed into them and then they exist in that time for a while. Um, this is sort of the extension of that, where this is how it kind of works, but you can freely access these places without even having the exhibits, which is a bit of a step up. um okay, now here's the thing that in this movie makes it really terrible. um when you get to the new world, you have to take on a persona of a character inside of the story. And sometimes you get totally lost in that character. So you may never escape. And that's sort of why you don't use Solomon's Locket. However, then there are the people who, when they remain in Cartagra, they end up being these people called time warriors. And that's the part where it just was like, oh, come on, guys. You could have left it at, let's go back in time and explore really cool fan fiction, because all these fictional worlds can be real, and every Mary Sue out there can, become whoever they want to be in all of these different places, and skip the time warriors because that was just ridiculous. But anyway, they didn't, and there was a lot that happened, which I won't get into because it is just absolutely ridiculous. But there are sorcerers, there are castles, there are, uh, you know, doorways to different places, and yeah, it gets really strangely convoluted. Although, again, it does sort of stay true and honest to its own lore. So, uh, you know, not the best movie ever, but Waxwork 2, it has Bruce Campbell in it. So, if you like Bruce Campbell, you might like this. It has uh Zach Galligan is the guy who is the main guy. Um he's our main protagonist. So, if you want to see something that uses the time focus a little bit differently and definitely pulls in alternate universe constructs, this is the movie for you. Just don't expect a whole lot from it. It's definitely a Saturday B flick, maybe a C flick. Have some popcorn, couple margaritas, it'll be good. Yeah, that's sort of my big take. So, Waxwork 2 is my number 8.
I can't say that I'm familiar with this one.
I can't imagine why you're not familiar with this one, Josh. I just can't. No, can't imagine. This is
Well,
where this is where having a breadth of movies that I have watched, good and bad, really comes into focus. Because I can pull from the vault on some movies that are pretty damn bad that most people would not have spent any time watching at all. And yeah, I did so. So this is why I have so much to sort of offer in this particular one. I've spent my time in the really bad universe of movies. I've done that.
one of these days, we're going to dip our toes into what your top 10 favorite bad movies are.
Oh man. Oh. That well is so full. It's so full. So plenty to choose from.
In the meantime, we're going to go into my number 7.
All right.
It's going to again be one that is not that I don't remember it, not that it's you'll see. I just don't think it warrants a whole lot of discussion here.
Right.
My number 7 is from 1987. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones.
Hey, that's a great movie. I almost picked that.
If you if you don't know who the Jetsons or the Flintstones are, oh, my sweet sweet child, where have you been? Are you old enough to listen to this show?
Uh-huh.
So there's that. Second, the Jetsons and the Flintstones, classic, uh, classic Hanna Barbera cartoons from way back in the day, and they had a very long shelf life that ran all the way through the 90s, and in some ways still are prevalent today. Looking at you, Fruity Pebbles. But the thing is, they crossed over in a movie. Elroy Jetson creates a time machine. They go back to the Stone Age, meet the Flintstones, right after Barney and Fred get fired from their jobs. And of course, these futuristic people with their gadgets and gizmos, make an impression. Next thing you know, things happen. The Flintstones wind up in the future, and now the future is the past. As far as technology goes, that sounds familiar. Looking at you, vinyl record players being the latest greatest thing. Sorry,
Uh-huh.
but long
Well, they
story
are
short,
again. Everything old is new
yeah,
again.
and that's what happens in this movie. And then they kind of called it in 1987. They're like, hey, these new vehicles, and they basically create the Flintstones car in the future because the future is the past. So uh, if you're into great cartoons with wonderful wonderful voice acting talent, then yes, absolutely, these are classics that will never die. uh, Other than that, eh, whatever you want to do, man. It's you're either into it or you're not, and I'm into it. So that's why I made my list. Number 7.
Very nice. Uh, that was actually a good one. And honestly, I really almost chose that one. Because I feel like that because I feel like that is such a pure example of super good time travel. So good, very good. All right. My number 7. Okay. My number 7 is oh boy. So this movie, I kind of went back and forth on it because I do really like this movie, but I like it for reasons which which is a bit different. I like the movie because Ray Bradbury wrote it, and it the it's a short story. It's not, like it's not a novel or anything.
It's not what
So
I
it
think it is it?
I don't know. What are you thinking it is?
Well, I've never seen the movie based on it, and that's sad for me. But
Oh,
it sounds like you might be talking about The Sound of Thunder.
I am talking about The Sound of Thunder.
I'm
The
smart.
I liked the story. The story had a really good premise, but the film, man, I don't know what they thought they were doing. It's terrible. Um, it didn't. It not only didn't it work, but it fell so far short. Like typically, a movie like this would be all the rage, right? uh it's Jurassic Park sort of at its core. um Ben Kingsley is in it. Like there's some gravitas going on here, but it doesn't connect at all because one, it feels preachy, which I absolutely hate in a movie. That drives me crazy. Second, and I mean this with no malice toward foreign directors, because I absolutely believe that foreign movies, I mean, I watch a ton of them, and I appreciate foreign direction and foreign storytelling in a way that is so different from the West version of telling a story. um, for the differences in timing, the sort of mix up of acts one, two, and three, beginning, middle, and end aren't always as tightly put together and things like that. But in this movie, I feel like they were trying to go for something that felt a little bit foreign in its storytelling, and it couldn't exist in that world because it really required a tight structure, and it fell apart, just fell apart. So these two guys, well, actually more than that, there's a group of people, and they go on a time safari. And the time safari, basically they go and they are hunting dinosaurs. And there's something sort of insidious about that altogether. Anyway, uh but there's more that sort of happens here that I won't get into everything that goes on. The movie was released a long time ago. It's 2005, but it's worth it to watch if you're interested in sort of seeing an alternate understanding of time waves, things that happened, like the paradox that I was talking about before. Because they do sort of talk quite a bit about these very profound things that happen because of the time traveling safari hunters. And is this to me is sort of like the science fiction core of asking the right questions. It's just this movie didn't delve into focusing on asking the right questions and then keeping our focus as the viewers on that. They went all over again to all these different, kind of ideas with particle accelerators and ideas about I don't know how to fix things, and it just fell apart because there was too much to pay attention to. But the premise is still really good, and the idea that you cannot time travel without there being some paradox occurring is sort of right on the money. So only for that premise, and honestly, not everybody's performance was super awful. Although, to go back to my Rotten Tomatoes kick, this movie scored a 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. Six. It regularly, when I see it around, it's like, three or so. And for the most part, it's because it feels for a time travel movie, you have to have some kind of continuity. Despite the fact that you're jumping back and forth in time, you have to have continuity between your characters and between your plot threads, and this movie doesn't seem to have that. It's like, what happens in one place is totally sort of disconnected, and performance wise it feels like they're shooting three different movies. So I get why people didn't like it. It totally makes sense. But for the purpose of our list, I added it here, because it is a really good example of the time travel paradox and what it is that would happen if we were able to go back in time, how it actually would affect our world. So I think Ray Bradbury had a really good idea, but yeah, the movie was not very well done. So number 7, Sound of Thunder.
I really enjoyed the story reading it when I was a young person,
Mm.
and I had the audio uh, production. Not necessarily an audio book, but full uh, fully voice acted production, and it was really cool.
It, it's a good. I think like it. Almost everything that Ray Bradbury ever wrote was interesting, even if not everything was like stellar. Most things that Ray Bradbury wrote, he was a gifted science fiction writer,
Hmm.
and his ideas were really so far ahead of his time. And you can tell that he was really trying to puzzle out some things in this story. So I think that's what made it really good.
So now I get to say, good choice.
Thanks. Thanks. I again, terrible movie, but good story. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen the story, or the movie, so I'm just basing it on Ray Bradbury being awesome.
Indeed. Yes, he is very awesome. I'll definitely agree with that.
You ready for my number 6?
I'm ready.
All right, let's rock and roll with the number 6. This should come as no surprise that, of course, Star Trek's going to make the list.
Guess I had Star Trek on my list too, so we'll see which one you chose.
Oh, you're like a step ahead of me with the. But which one is it?
Mm.
Someone's been paying attention. My number 6 is Star Trek First Contact.
Ooh. Yep, that's definitely on my list.
Really?
Indeed.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'll always get out of the way of the master. But when it comes to my feelings of the movie, you know, Star Trek has been around for what, 60 years ish?
Yeah, I think so.
And it's had many iterations. And for a lot of it, it's been like one basic continuity with beginning with Kirk and the Enterprise, continuing through the movies, then Next Generation, kind of going hand in hand with those. Not those specific movies, but kind of running parallels. You could watch it on TV, you go see it in the theaters. The original crew versus the Next Generation, and once Generations came and brought the two crews together, uh, so to speak, because throughout the Next Generation, Scotty showed up and he, Spock appeared every now and then. The point is, when it came to the original crew and the Next Generation, there were several handoffs, as and Generations being the big one between Kirk and Picard, and that sort of signified the move for the Next Generation to go to inherit the theaters, uh, if you'd like to put it that way. One of those Next Generation films that came out after that is First Contact, and it's a part of the Star Trek lore that you know had been talked about, but to actually see it play out on screen as someone that's watched these shows, talking about Zephyrin Cochrane's first warp flight for Earth, and how that's what got them noticed by the intergalactic community, if you will. It was a fun, but also, how do I put this? I don't want to say serious. That just seems kind of bleh, like a no word. But it ties the pivotal moment of Earth's history in the Star Trek franchise. Making first contact with the key sort of enemy of the next generation, which is, of course, the Borg, and how this story definitely doesn't wrap up the Borg arc with Starfleet, but it kind of brings things full circle to kind of I'm not even sure what the word I'm looking for is. They sort of create like a snake eating its own tail. It just becomes this thing of they were there to help get Cochrane to warp, but if they weren't there, would it have still happened? Not really important questions in the movie overall, but with the Borg being an ever present menace. The point is, to me, this movie represents a lot of classic Star Trek um, exploration, except it's not exploring space as much as exploring Starfleet's own history. And that's something that doesn't necessarily reflect well in the next generation movies, if I'm being completely honest. This is one of my favorites out of the next generations. Don't count that as a next generation movie. Don't count it as an original crew movie. That's a nice blend of both. And I would I would say First Contact is probably the one that will always stand out as far as um, enjoyability when it comes to the next generation on the big screen. So, number 6, Star Trek First Contact.
Well, good choice, and I do have a little bit to add to that, but I will wait until I get there on my list.
Okay.
Mostly, there's not a whole lot structurally that I can add to it, but I will add just some of the little things that made me think that this was a good time travel movie, because time travel is sort of it's at the core of the story here. So I'll explain that when I get there. Um, okay, so my number six is a movie that, okay, so I grew up watching these movies. I don't really understand why. I think it was because my dad liked them. And I remember my dad being very sort of keenly uh interested in showing me these movies because he thought I would like them. And I think part of the reason he thought I would like them is because I was the geeky dorky kid walking around with science fiction in her hand when I was, 7 and 8 years old. And he was not wrong. He was totally right. But even at the time that I saw them, um they were they they had they perhaps hadn't aged as well as I think my dad thought that they would have aged, and that might be why I had a slightly difficult time sort of understanding what was going on or why it was going on. However, I still loved them, and as an adult, going back to rewatch these, especially if you watch them sort of in a marathon, it's actually kind of interesting. So the movie is called Escape from the Planet of the Apes. Now, there's a little bit of a conundrum happening here because the prequel to Escape from the Planet of the Apes is a movie called Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And Beneath the Planet of the Apes basically ends with the destruction of Earth. So, hello, what can there be? There cannot be anything else. Where would we get apes from? Okay, but what they do kind of cleverly is they have the apes fix Taylor, who is the original time traveling human who goes into the future and then finds out that they blew up the Earth. They fix his spaceship, and the two chimpanzees head into the past from the future of the Planet of the Apes to our time. And it's quite an interesting premise, obviously. As crazy as they felt it was for humans to talk, obviously, if we saw apes, chimpanzees talking as if they were fully socialized uh, beings, that mimicked exactly what we do as humans, we would have a hard time with it too. It's one of the coolest premises of Planet of the Apes altogether is that humans are no longer, quote unquote human to us. It's the apes that have evolved to be more than the society has evolved so that humans don't talk, humans live in herds, humans are the animal and the apes are the evolved ones. Well, when we work with Escape from Planet of the Apes, the time travel aspect of this is basically it's a time warp that that the destruction of Earth creates when they get into the Taylor spaceship. Um, that time warp brings them to early 1970s on Earth, and it's such an interesting. Planet of the Apes is always such an interesting observation of humanity on both sides of the spectrum. Now, this movie, I think, really went hard on sort of dealing with a kind of a preconceived racism, and you can see why. I mean, at the time that this movie was made, which was early 1970s, um, the the struggle for racial equality was sort of like at its apex as as a movement, and we're still struggling with it today. So from an existence standpoint, it kind of makes sense that the movie would really focus in on that. And it's fascinating, I think, also because, again, our preconceived notions about what is human and what is animal are incredibly shaped by simply our ego. What do we do? What do humans do? Well, then that's human. And we create human like behavior out of our pets and give them personality and you know make them as human as we possibly can without I think sometimes really understanding what this is all about. So the time travel aspect of this is sort of never completely explained. It's a time warp. It doesn't have a lot of technical or solid explanation, but the point is that the explosion, in a really similar way to what happened with Taylor, brings them back in time just like it brought Taylor forward in time. So it kind of I feel like it kind of works. It works in the reverse way. I kind of liked it. It's amazing that more people didn't want to find out about the future from the chimpanzees, um and they didn't listen. Nobody listened, and that, I think, is sort of another good aspect of science fiction, where time travel does not always mean that people will get the message, that even if you send them back with a really important message, they may not understand that message at all. They may completely find it irrelevant. They may totally ignore it. And mostly it's because, yeah, we're not ready for those messages. We're in a different time. So, my number six, Escape from the Planet of the Apes. I wish there was more to say about the time travel, but there you go.
Why don't you go on and take us into the top five?
Okay. Well, we did talk about this movie, so I will expand on it a little bit. So my number five is 12 Monkeys. And as Josh said, 12 Monkeys is I feel like 12 Monkeys is actually a fairly um not just well known, but it's sort of one of the most iconic time travel movies that there has kind of been. Um, Brad Pitt and Bruce Willis, I will say, make a dynamic team here. But I'm also not going to leave out Christopher Plummer, who is absolutely stellar in the role that he plays. Really excellent. So let me give you sort of the breakdown. The breakdown is that there is a virus and it's been released in 1996. And it basically wipes out most of humanity. The survivors end up uh, going and living underground, and there's this group that become the army of the 12 monkeys. And they're the one, well, they don't become, but they're the group that they believe are the ones who released the virus. Okay. So flash forward to 2035, and you have a prisoner who's living in one of these underground compounds, and he's selected to go back in time and find the original virus so that scientists can develop a cure, and in exchange for that he will get a reduced sentence. Okay, now all this time the character is experiencing these kind of well, we don't really know what they are, but we'll call them dreams, and they involve a shooting at an airport. So that is sort of a through line. Um, now, this is where I think the movie actually does itself a lot of credit. He Cole, the name of the character, that's Bruce Willis's character, arrives and he's arrested, and he tells them the story. He tells them a story, and basically they think he's crazy and they stick him in a mental hospital. Um, this I think is like one of the most real sort of things that probably would happen if somebody came to you and said, "I'm from the future. Uh, there's going to be a really horrible thing that happens. I gotta save humanity." They would be committed to a mental institution, of course. This is sort of fascinating to me because, this is one of those would the message get received kind of movies, which I think, get very little attention. And I feel like this is really a good uh, typification of what really would happen. Um, okay. So, um, I won't go into the whole movie, but let's just say that uh, throughout the movie, um, the the people who are holding Cole, the ones that sent him back in time, they can also bring him forward. They can teleport him forward. And they do so, adding to the movie's really difficult sort of like what's real, what's going on, how is, and they don't always put him exactly back where he was. There's some really fascinating things that sort of make you think, is this guy totally crazy? And he starts to believe maybe he's a little bit crazy, I think. Um, there's just some really fascinating sort of ideas about how it must mess with your mind completely. And I love that. I do. I really love that because that also feels like, if you're in one reality and then suddenly you're in another reality, what does that feel like? How in the world could you possibly sort of rationalize all of these input structures that are happening to you and exist without feeling some kind of psychotic break? It's just crazy. And Bruce Willis does a great job of being truly unhinged in this movie. Like, this is one of my favorite Bruce Willis roles other than Die Hard. Because he really, really makes you feel something just absolutely ebbing away at his sanity. And it's good. I mean, it's really excellent acting. Um, in the end, we end up with sort of the idea that young Cole, the person who they sent back in time, has actually been a witness to all this history all the time. He has absolutely been a witness to the history. And this is why he was having those sort of flashbacky dreams. So there is a little bit of a loop happening. It obviously feels as if the paradox was meant, or that it isn't a paradox, that it's actually a closed time loop, and that he was predestined to come back in time and confront the virus people. All the other thing, which I also feel like kind of makes sense here, is, I love it when movies about time travel try to keep some kind of uniformity with not just what would happen, but how it would happen. And 12 Monkeys really delves into the how it would happen. Not only would you seem insane, not only would you start questioning your own sanity, but the idea that you were moving yourself through time, it's got to have some kind of mental impact on you. And for him, not only was he a prisoner, but he was also sort of like the one who possibly could have avoided this deadly plague that was going to wipe out most of the world. I mean, that's a huge amount of gravitas to have attached to any kind of situation. And they play this off so well. I absolutely love this movie. I think it's well worth watching. And again, it's one of the most iconic, I think, time travel movies that we have out there. A lot of people reference 12 Monkeys as one of the best sort of adaptations of how time travel would affect the human psyche. And if I can if I can mention again my crazy Rotten Tomatoes thing, because I don't know why I'm on this kick, but I absolutely am on this kick. I think that this movie ends up being in the high 80s pretty consistently. Um, most people most people have a hard time sort of reconciling all the plot pieces because it does feel a little bit jumbled, but it's well worth it to just sort of watch it and then maybe rewatch it, because I guarantee you'll miss things the first watch through because you won't be paying attention to the things that actually matter, and they do end up mattering. So yeah, so I'm going to say that this was a really good movie, and it is my number 5 choice, 12 Monkeys.
I'm inclined to agree with you there.
I really liked it. I really liked it. And also I got to say I really liked Brad Pitt. This is where I really started to realize what a good actor Brad Pitt was. Not just, he wasn't just cute, he was really, like, he's talented. And this movie, I mean, it definitely played to all his strengths. There was a there was a design for a 12 Monkeys TV series, and I don't know whatever happened to it. I never saw it. But apparently if you go back to the Sci-Fi Channel, there is a 12 Monkeys series that had like a first, second, and third episode. So, or first, second, and third season. So I don't know. Feel like I should go back and watch that. Maybe it could be good.
Maybe. I can't say that I have seen that one, but just the premise alone makes me think it's worth visiting the
Yeah.
series.
Yeah, yeah. It would be really interesting to see what they did. I do know that the writer for a series called Terra Nova is the one who was in charge. He was the showrunner. And if you don't know what Terra Nova is, that's the story where they basically are coexisting with dinosaurs. And you'd think that it would be like super dumb, but it was actually really good. Terra Nova was great. So, yeah, could be good. We'll see.
Well, is it time for me to break into my number 5?
It is time for you to break into your number 5. What do you got for your number 5?
Well, I have to do this right. So it is time for number 5. Was that too much?
Nope. That was the perfect amount of fanfare.
So sorry. I had to bring my list back up. Um, my number 5 is sort of a more recent addition to um, the category, if you will. and it is so uh so close to not being exactly what it is supposed to be that it almost didn't make my list, let alone get so high on my list.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
So yeah, it's a very very thin line I'm walking here as far as eligibility goes. Um, my number 5 is The Tomorrow War. Are you familiar with this one?
Mm, I don't know if I've seen this.
Came out in 2021. It is about uh, aliens that come and invade Earth, and in the future, time travel is created. So what they do is they go back in time,
Oh, I did see this.
and
Yes. Yes.
yeah, and they take people to the future to
Yes.
fight the aliens, people that weren't, I imagine, supposed to live much longer to begin with, so they wouldn't really affect the timeline. And yeah, it's starring Chris Pratt. It's what you think it is, you know.
Yep.
But the reason I say it walks on a very thin line here is because the movie was released um, in 2021. The movie initially takes place, as far as where the people are coming from. I mean, the time travelers come from the future to take people back to the future. No pun intended. Anyway, it's this whole big thing. Point is, it's 2022, so we say, future. And as far as release date goes, yes, this was technically in the future on all accounts. So I'm going to let it go, uh, even though it's your list, and hopefully you'd feel the same way. The 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 selling point of this is basically this is a Chris Pratt movie, and he's going to Chris Pratt through the whole thing, and it's about people, just regular people, being transported through time to be soldiers and fight in sort of alien invasion. It's it's all on Front Street. There's not a really big deep dive to go into, as at least after one viewing. It's a fun story. It's I got I was surprised at how well it was done, as far as the action sequences and doing a fine enough job getting you to feel for the people that are fighting for their planet. There are a lot of movies that don't even try to get the empathy button going on you. But you know what? The Tomorrow War gave it a lot of credit for being better than I thought it would be, uh, and just for sheer originality. Yeah, we've seen movies about people time traveling to face whatever crisis is um, facing the Earth, but from this perspective, where the people are just regular folks, being trained to fight aliens. It was cool. And that's why it's my number 5, The Tomorrow War.
So, as an addendum on this movie, this is an Amazon Prime original. And I think that this movie, if you view it as a good monster movie with, huge dose of I don't know, male action energy in it, um, you can really like it. And to go back to my Waxwork 2 kind of movie, although they don't compare, it feels like a Saturday flick movie. Grab some popcorn, a couple margaritas, you're going to love this movie. It's got a lot of sort of intense action sequences. And honestly, some of the special effects in this movie are about as good as they get, or were as good as they got at the time. It is truly amazing. But I will say that this movie does the same thing with every cliche and every tropey sort of storytelling piece that everybody else does in time travel, which is that they don't ever explain the time travel. And they just sort of say, okay, this just exists and here you go, without ever giving us any explanation about how these things came to be and why they exist and what was the point. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't some expositions that sort of give you narrative leads in that direction. And J.K. Simmons is in this, and he does, I think, a good job of sort of giving us some of those. But it never actually rises to the full, what I think could have been its full potential, which is it could have been a really good science fiction story, and it ends up being no, it's kind of a good Saturday afternoon monster movie. So good movie, but God, I really wish they would have done more with you know, at least give us some idea of how did you guys come up with the time travel idea? Like, really? Come on. Anyway, yeah. So definitely worth a Saturday afternoon viewing. I totally agree. Okay, my number 4 movie is the aforementioned Star Trek First Contact. And I won't actually go into too much detail with this one because Josh did a great job. But I will say, um, Star Trek has always been on the cutting edge of giving us ideas about time travel that sort of challenge our notion of both what would happen and why it would happen. And I go back to an original Star Trek series episode called what was it called? Darn it, now I'm going to forget what it's called. I want to say it was The Edge of Tomorrow. Um, it's the one where they end up on a planet and there's an actual portal, and Spock goes through it, loses his memory, doesn't remember anything, and then McCoy and Kirk follow and chase him. They find out things that need to happen, which really are sort of counterintuitive to what they want to happen. Of course, Kirk has a romance, and Spock, kind of by proxy, also has a romance. It's interesting. Um, and they find out that this woman has to die. And now, the reason that I'm saying this is because the Star Trek treats time travel with a lot of deference. They give it a lot of import and value. And the movie First Contact does something very similar, where the time travel in the movie itself is treated with a, a lot of reverence. They don't enter into this lightly. And I feel like that is very important because they understand that the Borg have now used time travel to change the past, and they they have to figure out how to reconcile that. And uh, as they do, they answer a lot of questions among themselves about what this really means and how they can navigate what comes next. And I found the whole thing so thoughtful, so well executed from a science fiction perspective. And on top of that, now this is just movie wise. Well, time travel now is out of the picture. This movie is the first movie I can remember seeing with Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard, where he basically takes the gloves off and becomes the Jean-Luc Picard that is just off the rails. And it works so well because of all the things that he's experienced in his past, um, because of the there is just something so raw and so visceral about this character as he's playing it all the way through that is compelling beyond belief. I just absolutely loved it. This movie was also directed by none other than the second officer, Jonathan Frakes, William Riker. And that, I think, added a layer of complexity to the movie, which was sorely needed and did not disappoint. So, other than having all the rest of the original cast in place, I was just so impressed with everybody's performances, but specifically Patrick Stewart's performance. So, Star Trek First Contact makes the number 4 on my list. And I will say one thing about this. There is nothing in the time travel here that doesn't make sense. It totally all makes sense. So if you really go back and watch the movie, you get all the clues that you need for how they're using time travel and why they were able to even pick that up, why the Borg were able to pick that up in the first place. It's actually really well and thoughtfully crafted. So that's my number 4, Star Trek First Contact.
Excellent choice, if I do say so myself.
Yes, indeed.
So I guess it is time for me to move on to my number 4. It is one that might draw a bit of ire.
Hmm.
Just I don't know why, because I think overall it's considered good. Maybe not great, but definitely good.
Hey, dude, I put Waxwork 2 on my list, so, pride's got nothing to do with it. Just throw it out there.
All right, my number 4 is X-Men: Days of Future Past.
Oh, hey. That's not a bad choice.
It is I think, a very good X-Men film. Sorry, I'm having just the mic here. So yeah, it's a very good X-Men film. It's all about our favorite X-Man, Wolverine, going back in time to stop an assassination that was the key to making sure that relations between Homo sapien and Homo superior, or mutants and humans, doesn't go well. This assassination is really the beginning of the end, as far as creating a dystopian future that the movie starts off in the robotic hellscape of 2023. Hey, that's us. So since you don't see any sentinels running around, you can imagine things went well on their mission. And yeah, it's an X-Men movie. Take it for what you will. I think like I said, it's one of the better ones. We get Wolverine, we get both young and older Charles Xavier to give us, the sweetness that is Professor X on screen. But even though there are even though there are Sentinels, even though there are lots of X-Men, even though that this is a time travel movie, which is my sweet spot when it comes to enjoying a film, the thing that I will always take away from this movie more than any other is that amazing Quicksilver spot in the kitchen. As what was it, Time in a Bottle playing?
Yeah.
I don't. And the first time you're watching it, you don't know what's about to happen, but police are opening fire. Wolverines, they got the claws coming out, and then suddenly time stops, basically, and Quicksilver's just running around, sometimes kind of doing goofy stuff, but all the time making sure that The people he needs to be safe are safe. It is still quite the scene to watch, and a feat to pull off. I will even say that when they did it again, I believe it was X-Men Apocalypse, that they know how to utilize Quicksilver better than the MCU. I said it. I mean, well, in the MCU, it was, oh, you didn't see that coming, and and then yeah, but we don't talk about that anymore.
Mhm.
Not really. That's a discussion for an entire another thing. Anyway, the point is, Days of Future Past has a lot going for it, and if you haven't seen it and you want to see what a speedster should probably look like on the big screen or just in a movie, look no further than this movie. X-Men: Days of Future Past is my number 4.
Nice. Okay. My number 3. Okay, I'm just gonna launch right into this because this is I think this is one of those kinds of movies that um oh boy. Uh it's hmm, I guess this is kind of one of those like, all right, it was set when the movie came out, it would have been the future, but we've passed it now. So I threw it in here though because I feel like this movie does a pretty good job of sort of giving us the full exposition of what what is called a time loop and how it kind of works and why it's so bad. Um, all right, so the movie is called Edge of Tomorrow, and I really don't like Tom Cruise. I've never liked Tom Cruise. But I have to say that in this role, I can't actually see anybody else working. Um, that you need some kind of machismo here that Tom Cruise kind of captures. And I can't think of anybody that would be as dedicated to a role and be able to pull off the things that he can pull off and make it believable. So I'll say that I kind of like that. And part of the reason is so the film is basically a science fiction um, movie that deals with aliens called mimics. And they don't understand, they can't figure out how to kill these creatures. And they turn this guy into a combat vet or a combat uh, specialist, even though he has no combat experience. Um, and he, there's some sort of interesting things that happen along those lines, which it's kind of like the only sort of social aspect to this. The rest of the movie is basically just a good old fashioned action monster movie. The monsters are great. The aliens are so good in this. I mean, their concept is brilliant. Their design is brilliant. The way that they move is absolutely terrifying. And then when you learn that they're actually they have these different connections in their brains, they become even more terrifying. Like it's actually quite intelligently done, I will say. Um, so the time travel part of this is our protagonist basically is stuck in a time loop until he figures out how to kill these monsters. And there there is there's a, I guess for lack of a better word, a perpetual motion thing that keeps going with this, which is both frustrating and moves the plot forward. So that is kind of always an interesting thing where you end up feeling a little bit frustrated with the movie for not moving things forward more, only to find out that yeah, this is the only way to do it. And it works. It works, but you have to be patient with the movie. um it's, I can't say that this is the best movie of all time. Sorry, pardon the pun. But I really liked what is sort of the ultimate end here, where you understand that the use of time travel, or a time loop in this case, is you have to be careful how you employ this. Like it resets the question in science fiction. Yes, you have the technology, but what's the consequence? And I feel like this movie does a really good job of expressing to all of us that there are consequences to this, and they're not always what you think they might be. And sometimes when you solve one problem with time travel, you open up a Pandora's box of other problems. And that also felt very obvious, like there were problems happening here. I did like it. I really liked this movie. Despite the fact that, it seemed like it had a lot not going for it. In the end, it ended up being a good action flick, a really good action flick. I'm gonna mention one thing real quick. Um, Apparently, this movie had a sequel that was supposed to be in development, but HBO Max, has some kind of TV series also in development for it. And although I have not heard anything about this in a very long time, um, it has been sort of flying under the radar for quite some time. So we may end up with a series that is Edge of Tomorrow, which could be really interesting. And again, the use of time travel, I think, is where they will play most of uh, their cards. The plot will unfold in the time travel, so could be interesting. I don't know, but my number three, Edge of Tomorrow.
That almost made my list, but there was one thing that stopped me from putting it on there.
Yes.
It's not a time travel movie.
Well, it kind of is.
It's not.
It is. Looping back in time is actually time travel.
But it's not.
But how can it not be? You're looking at this from a linear perspective, but it actually is time travel. I mean, did give this some thought.
I do believe time travel and time loops are two different things.
Oh, see, that's yes. Then I can see we could have definitely a semantic conversation about where sort of the lines are that separate those two. But I consider them to be one for a lot of different reasons, which we can get into at another time.
That's
But
a
in the
nerd fight
meantime,
for another day.
yes, in the meantime, let's move on to your number three.
My number three is very, very clearly a time travel movie.
Hey, don't be calling me out like that. Stop that.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just stating for the record that my number three fits the criteria to a T.
I
Uh,
see. Oh,
because
you're gonna
some
love my number two if you didn't like that one. Oh boy.
my, my number three is Time Cop. Yeah, gotta love that huge reaction.
That's a good one. That is a good one, actually. I didn't I didn't like this movie, which is why it didn't make my list.
Well, it came out when I was like 11 or 12.
Where you
So
get
a
those
Rob,
nostalgia feels. Interestingly, Time Cop was also done by Peter Hyams, who also did Sound of Thunder.
oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, so there you go.
Well, Time Cop, in case you couldn't figure out by the title, is about a guy that polices time, but not in a cool Doctor Who kind of way, more of a 1990s Jean Claude Van Damme kind of way. You know, time travelers, you kick them in the face
Mhm.
and stop them from doing that. That's, I mean, you can't really dissect this movie because as soon as you put in the scalpel, it's all going to fall apart anyway. All you need to know is it's Jean Claude Van Damme doing Jean Claude Van Damme things, in the midst of time travel, where he has to stop. It's good time travelers have to stop bad time travelers. Eh, there's people double crossed, and it's not a deep story. But if you ever felt like seeing Rob Van Dam do a split on some kitchen counters, is this movie the one for you? That's basically what it's going to be remembered for, I think, most of all. Him just jumping up into the air and doing a split. Everything else, well, maybe the whole conversation about what's that spot on the wall. And
Oh God.
yeah, if you know, you know. So the time travel, super simple. You get into this sort of one man subway car. Okay, it's more like a rocket ship on rails. And then you get like launched until you are not in your year anymore. Yeah, it's not rocket
Yes, it's the
science. It's
old
barely
propel
time
yourself
travel.
around the sun kind of logic.
Essentially. And
Mhm. Yeah.
Rob Van Dam, God, John Claude Van, JCVD, RVD is of course a wrestler. JCVD kicks people in the face, as does Rob Van Dam, but not in this movie. JCVD kicks people in the face, does some splits, and saves the day. Boom. There's your 90s time travel movie from Peter Hyams and Jean Claude Van Damme. And it's my number three.
I actually read or perused. I don't know if I actually read it all the way through, but I definitely was uh looking through this comic that it's based on, and it's actually kind of interesting. There's quite a few changes, but it's still pretty cool. And the good guys, one of the things about this, it's from Dark Horse Comics. One of the things that's like so cut and dry is it feels very uh superhero-ish, because the good guys are good guys and the bad guys are bad guys, like black and white. They are very apparent. There isn't a whole lot of gray space in between, but there is a part of this comic which sort of veers into, are we actually the bad guys, and are you actually the good guys? And that was actually cool, and I wish they would have gone into that a little bit further, but yeah, whatever, it is what it is. Anyway, just in case you want further reading, there's a Dark Horse comic which is sort of, I think it's a whole series, and Time Cop is based on that, so could be interesting, could be interesting.
Maybe it'd be worth a
um
check out one day.
Yeah, well, I happen to love graphic novels, and I still absolutely love comics. They still make me very happy. I love, yeah, still very, 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 very invested in them. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed? Okay, my number two, which for some reason I labeled number three. My number two is a movie which, honestly, from a title perspective, could also work, but you're not going to like it because this is also a time loop movie. It's called Time Crimes. Time Crimes is a Spanish science fiction movie. Um,
Dios
it
mío.
it is, and honestly, this movie is off the rails. It is so good, so incredibly good. I really love this movie on every level that there is to love it. I love the lighting. I love the performance. I love the the sets, which are crazy, subtle, and yet amazingly very specific. I love the costuming. That also is so cool, and I love the premise. So the premise of this is that um, there's an experimental time travel device, and the time travel device basically the scientist, his name is Hector, he uses it and he accidentally replicates himself. And as he's replicating himself, he realizes that he has to get rid of his others. And so getting rid of his others means he's got to kill them. So there's Hector 1, Hector 2, and Hector 3. And there's some nefarious things that happen here, like really nefarious things. And the as an example, Hector 2 thinks that he killed his own wife. When actually that's not what happens, but it sets off a chain of events. And I won't give you the actual resolution just in case you want to see it. It is so well done though, and it keeps you sort of on the edge of your seat until the end. I don't suggest that you watch the dubbed version of this. I don't know why, but the voice acting was so bad. Read the subtitles and just watch the movie and read the subtitles. It's so amazing. Um this movie was shot with a like 2.5 million budget, like really small, tiny small, and it grossed over $500 million at the box office. So, I mean, like that should tell you something. It really just exceeded all expectations. And if you watch it, you'll understand why. It's such a good use of the time travel premise, and it exists sort of in a world where, once again, the unintended consequences of traveling back in time give you a a perspective on why we shouldn't do it and then what happens. But this one adds another layer where every time he time travels, he makes another replica of himself that he then has to deal with. So that, and he's trying to fix the mistakes of the first time travel by replicating again. It's so good. It's so good. So my number 2 is Time Crimes. Highly suggest that you watch it. It gets amazing reviews. Every time I see somebody review it, it's always off the scales. And just in case, that doesn't prove it, the box office scores should. I mean, people absolutely ate this film up. So, number 2, Time Crimes.
I went to add it to my watch list, and you know what? Los Cronocrímenes is already on it.
Oh, good. Good deal. Yeah, definitely very worth watching. So worth watching.
And it's
And
on a lot of services. So yeah.
it's aged really well. Like, it was done in the sort of earlier 2000s, but it's aged really well because because it uses mostly practical effects. It's not using a lot of SFX, and also because it's so story oriented that, like, you're really paying attention to the narrative. It doesn't rely on a lot of gimmicky stuff. So, definitely very worthwhile. So worthwhile.
Well, moving on to mine, number 2.
Number 2.
I know some people are going to think it's kind of a, uh, I'm not even sure what the word is, but you're going to be like, dude, you're going to put it in another superhero movie for your top 10 list.
Hey, I
And
got
it's,
nothing but love for superhero movies,
and
so
it's going to be
no
another
shame.
Marvel movie.
No shame.
The answer is yes. Yes, I am. Because after the uh, the greatness that I talked about in Days of Future Past, We got a follow up to another awesome movie. This movie had the incredibly difficult job of following Avengers: Infinity War, but I think it did an admirable job doing so. I'm talking about Avengers: Endgame. A lot of
Smart
people
one.
forget that is a time travel movie,
Yep.
very
He
much
has
so.
the time. He's got the time stone.
And it's funny because, well, let's go through this. In Avengers: Infinity War, spoilers if you haven't seen that. Why haven't you seen that? I mean, come on. But spoilers for that movie, like everybody gets snapped away pretty much. Half the Avengers are like, the snapping happens, and that leaves kind of everybody else to, well, everybody basically retires, more or less. And next thing you know, as time passes, 5 years go by, as half of all life in the universe is gone. Everyone's trying to move on with their lives. Tony Stark's, he's got a kid. I love you 3000. And uh, Ant-Man just kind of pops up out of nowhere because of a rat. It's okay. It sounds a lot kookier than it actually is. Okay, no, it sounds just as kooky as it actually is. But uh, like Tony Stark invents time travel literally overnight. And he says, hey, if we're going to do this, if we're going to go back in time, nothing can change. We cannot change the timeline. We cannot make anything different. So, one of the most marvelous things, pun intended, that they did in this movie was to go back basically into other movies that we've already seen and give us, they sort of Back to the Future 2'd it, right? You're seeing stuff you've seen before, but you're seeing it from a different angle. And in a lot of ways, it's absolutely hilarious. Hulk, you gotta smash stuff, and you got the smart Hulk that's going around like, right, uh, smash, grr, not really doing, you know, angry Hulk stuff, but he's
Hmm.
trying, as we say down here. Bless his heart. The the Captain America fight scene, yeah, where he basically fights himself. Rad. It is absolutely rad, and he takes a second to, you know, check himself out. He's like, yeah. Anyway, kind of getting it off on a tangent here. The time travel to make things the same but completely different is one of those things that you see in a lot of time travel movies. Where Doc Brown says it all the time. We can't change the past, Marty. But at the same time, that's all they ever do. So in Avengers Endgame, following that mission and having Cap sort of do his ride off into the sunset by returning all of the stones um, to where they came from to ensure that their timeline exists, so Tony can go back to his family. Oops. And in turn, basically creates an entirely new subset of Marvel television. That we get Loki from this. Uh, you know, um, Falcon and Winter Soldier, is influenced directly by this. A lot of the shows that deal with what happens when people come back from the snap gets um, it's directly from this movie. So not only does this movie tell, I think, a fun story, especially after such a dark ending to Infinity War, but it also is a stepping stone to the things that we're going to see for the next few years after this movie came out. The the Russos are wonderful directors. I've been rewatching Community recently, and it's kind of hard to. I mean, think of it this way: if someone's like, you talk about the Avengers and you talk about, say, Rick and Morty, and you go, man, what if they collaborated on something together, the Russos and that Dan Harmon guy? You go, they did. It was called Community, and it was brilliant. 6 seasons in a movie, movies actually being made. So, well, actors on strike. Anyway, I digress. The Russos do a wonderful job, and that's the thing. When it came down to it, there was some you know uh, internet uh, buzz about the Russos being able to handle projects like this, and you gotta think back to where they came from with like a community show and things like that, where you realize no, the thing these guys seem to literally specialize in is being able to handle an ensemble, a cast of characters, and giving each of them uh, a chance to tell a full story, or at least for the story that's being told in the movie. So everybody gets a chance to shine. Russos are really good at spotlighting, and all together, it makes for, yeah, not as good as Infinity War, mostly because people remember the snap and how they walked out of the theater. But Endgame is no joke. It may not be the best the MCU has to offer, but it is definitely up there, and that is why it's my number two.
I Yeah, okay. Well, good choice. I mean, definitely time travel. Definitely, yeah, no explanation of the time travel. It's just okay, it's one of the Infinity Stones. It's a thing, it happens, blah blah blah. Yeah, I don't know. It isn't for me. It I guess it I mean technically I guess it works, but it's I feel like the time travel in that is just so, once again coining the same exact phrase, deus ex machina, like okay, well, it just exists. The Infinity Stones just exist. This is a thing. Although I will say, I love Loki for how commonplace the Infinity Stone like things are on the timeline, because they have them sitting around the office as if they're just like paperweights. Just so interesting. So
And
anyway, that's a
they
story for
did
another day.
explain the time travel.
I know, but not really. It's not. That's not science fiction. That's more like fantasy magic. And I run into this problem a lot with superhero movies, which is they want to be all things to all people at all times, and they can't because they're not science fiction. They are fantasy esque. um Superheroes are not mired in sci-fi. I mean, I would almost argue that Batman on the DC side could be more sci-fi. And so, if Batman came up with some kind of time travel, then I would be more amenable to it. But in
Well, Batman did explain to Flash how time travel works in
but
the
well,
Flash.
yes, right, but I'm saying if Batman came up with the like a piece of technology to make it work, or if Cyborg did, or whatever. Um, but in DC, I'm sorry, but in Marvel, there is a heavier cloak of fantasy over everything, and so it it doesn't matter how it works, it just matters that you believe it works. And that's honestly sort of like a common thread through a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, as an example. It doesn't matter how it works. What matters is you believe it works so that you know the fiction, you understand the narrative. I just happen to, with time travel in particular, I happen to like the more sci fi aspect to it. That's all.
I'd say it's pretty sci-fi.
I wouldn't. I
They
would not call that sci fi.
they had to create a machine to use the quantum realm to time travel.
No. I don't see it. I don't. I mean, maybe I don't see it because it's the quantum realm. Who knows? But I don't. That to me, there's still this fantasy element that's just a little bit overhanging. And I don't know. Maybe this is just my own sort of superhero bias because I definitely have that. I don't get me wrong. I love superhero movies. I grew up reading comics. It's not that I don't like them. It's just the way that we have crafted, especially the Marvel movies, we have heavy, very heavy overtones of you just have to believe that this works because it just does. There's a lot of magic involved. And it to me
Yeah,
that sort of
it's like literal.
cheapens the actual process by which things can work because it's just magic. So I'm not saying, I'm not calling it out as being bad or anything. It's good. It's just not what I consider to be like, oh yeah, here's the pinnacle um of this process, of the time travel process. But I get it. I totally get it. I do. We just have a differing view. And that will be very clear with my number one choice.
Oh, will it
Um
now?
it will, because I don't know if you've ever seen this movie. I'll just say what it is. It's called Primer. Have you ever seen the movie Primer?
I have seen it.
Okay. Okay. Primer is sort of, to me, the pinnacle of time travel. Um, I don't know when this is supposed to have happened. Um, and I guess, you know, sort of this. No, I can't say that it breaks the rule, but it definitely. I can't tell when Primer is supposed to actually have existed. I'm not sure. At some point in the future, because the capability doesn't exist now that we know of. Um, but Primer makes, I think, the strongest case for one, why we shouldn't create time travel, period. And two, how everything that you do in a time travel loop is already a predestination. And it's amazing to me to watch as this movie unfolds. First, the giddiness of being able to do it, and then the idea that you could benefit from it, go back and grab some stock tips, go back and grab some ability to do things on the exchange, which already by traveling into the past are going to happen. um and those kinds of things, and then really grappling with the hard hitting ideas about how doing those things can really unravel your whole world. Also, I love the fact that there is a physical effect on the time travelers. Um, they feel it. They get nosebleeds or ear bleeds or something. And there is something cognitively declining about their condition. And I also really like the idea that Abe and Aaron, the two main protagonists, are at odds with each other about, one being far more cautious and very careful, and the other being a bit more reckless, and maybe not even reckless, just a little bit more like let's experiment, let's see what happens, let's do more things. Um, but the one of the biggest reasons that I really love Primer is because this is one of the few movies that I've ever had somebody deconstruct how the time travel could work, and it like literally made sense. And they did it by showing me first this like diagram that was created to explain the time travel in Primer, and then by pushing this idea that the science behind this is basically um it's based on something called a Feynman diagram. And the it's kind of like there is an annihilation process when electrons or photons um, are pointing forwards. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm gonna totally botch this, but basically it's like if you there there's a theory out there that seems to be replicatable, that exists where you could have photons sort of existing in the same time period, even though they're basically replicas of each other. It's just a fascinating kind of a thing. Um, so so the movie sort of deals with the forward and backwards in time, and each time they think that they are trying to prevent each other from, or one is trying to prevent the other from creating the box in the first place, they end up realizing that that's not really possible. And the way that it unravels is so serious and so perfectly done. I will say that for a lot of people that I know who watched this movie said that it was boring, that they felt like it was just like going around and around in a circle and they couldn't understand what was supposed to be happening. And I think that that is extremely intentional. The movie is supposed to make you feel very uncomfortable. There was an interview that the director, who is also the star, did, where he talked about using fluorescent lighting because fluorescent lighting makes things feel uncomfortable. And I got, you definitely catch that. It feels at all times like there is a flickering in this world that exists and makes you uncomfortable with it. So Primer gets my number one choice as a movie that deals with time travel. They definitely knocked this one out of the park.
It is one that I should probably watch again. I can't take away from its storytelling. I did fall into the camp of this seems like a whole lot of nothing happening, but I don't think it's boring.
It
Maybe it's because
is,
I have an affinity for time travel, but it just seems like for one viewing, there's a lot going on, but also it seems like there's not. Does that make sense?
yeah, and again, I do think that that was absolutely intentional because the way that they're using time travel is there are it's kind of like Aaron and Abe are checks and balances on each other, and it's part of the reason that nothing grander happens, because they're continually trying to basically keep each other in check.
Uh-huh.
And that's why nothing huge goes on, but there's enough that's going on that gives you the depth of, it's the time travel is the essential narrative. And that's why I think people didn't quite understand it. The time travel as a process is the story. And so you really have to be invested in that, because there isn't a lot of other storytelling going on. You're not going to get, other than with Abe and Aaron, you're not going to get a lot of like deep character development. It's it's not about that. It is absolutely about the narrative of time travel. So that's why I think some people didn't quite get it.
And that's fair. I'm
but
not
that's
stupid.
what that's what gets my number one choice.
I think my number one's going to be kind of quick because I usually do that when we talk about movies we've talked about before.
Okay.
Coming in at number one for me, from director Kevin Smith. No, I wish he would do a time travel movie because then he could be number one on this list.
uh,
No, my number one is uh well, I mean, come on. It was always going to be this. It was always going to be this. As soon as you said it, I knew it was going to be this. We even said it as an example last week because this is what it was going to be. Talking about Star Trek 4 The Voyage Home.
see, I had a feeling. Well, I didn't know, but I had a feeling you would pick that one too.
Yes, directed by Leonard Nimoy in 1986. The crew of the Enterprise travel to 80 San Francisco. And by the way, just to, there's some things that need to be cleared up a little bit. One, I am aware, and hopefully everybody that has seen this remembers that no, they don't fly the Enterprise to the 80s. I
Hmm.
hear that mistake made a lot. Like, oh, they time travel in the Enterprise. No, they don't. They're in a Klingon bird of prey that they absconded with at the end of Star Trek 3 because things happened. And remember when we were talking about Star Trek in the original movies, how they were serialized and that made for some really awesome movie going experiences to see this one kind of linear story play out between, Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock and continue in Star Trek 4 The Voyage Home as Spock is still not 100% up to speed on who he is and then suddenly becomes not just a fish out of water, but like a fish that's doubly out of water because he's not only outside of his own timeline, he's outside of his own brain. That leads to a lot of interesting questions from the Vulcan that's found himself on 80s planet Earth. And everything about this movie is wonderful, especially when Kirk and company wind up going out into the world, in a world that takes money, a concept that they're not familiar with from the 23rd century, and technology isn't exactly at their speed. So yes, you get wonderful lines like "computer, hello, computer." No, you have to use the mouse. So he picks up the mouse. Hello, computer. That's just, yeah. I guess he had to be there. The point is the environmental environmentalism movie that is Star Trek for the Voyage Home, where there be whales. They're looking for whales to take to the future because why not? It just seems like such a weird aside in this saga where Kirk, you know, loses a son, gets demoted, blows up his ship, and then suddenly it's like, oh, now we have to go get whales. So it's so weird, and so that's what they do. They save the Earth by going to get some whales from the 1980s, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. My favorite Star Trek anything ever, and it was always going to be my number one. Star Trek 4 The Voyage Home.
Very good choice. Very good choice. Well, I will recap my list and then you could recap your list and then you can give me homework for this coming week.
Excellent.
All right. Okay, number 10 for me is the movie Free Jack. Number 9, Looper. Number 8, good old Waxwork 2, Lost in Time. Number 7, A Sound of Thunder. Number 6, Escape from the Planet of the Apes. Number 5, 12 Monkeys. Number 4, Star Trek First Contact. Number 3, Edge of Tomorrow. Number 2, Time Crimes. And number 1, Primer.
Well, my list is as follows. My number 10, Back to the Future Part 2. Number 9, Looper. Number 8, 12 Monkeys. Number 7, The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones. Number 6, Star Trek First Contact. Number 5, The Tomorrow War. Number 4, X-Men Days of Future Past. Number 3, Time Cop. Number 2, Avengers Endgame. And number 1, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. Jen, are you ready for your homework?
I'm super ready. But before you give me homework, I just got to say, look, I know that this was a tough assignment, and I think we actually did a fairly good job of both sticking to the criteria and coming up with some pretty interesting movies. And we didn't have a lot of crossover. So good job. Good job, us.
I think considering how specific the assignment was, it's pretty amazing we had as little crossover as we did
Yeah. Yeah.
because
That was impressive.
I think so too. Good job, us.
No doubt.
So you ready for your homework?
I'm ready.
Okay. A while back, we did this episode. Let me see if I can find the specific title of it. It was no, that wasn't it. There it is. It was Earthbound Sci-Fi from the 1970s,
Oh, yes. I remember that episode well.
and that made me think, what if we revisited the 70s?
Ooh. I'm
I wish I could
intrigued.
say it was in a you know really specific type of way, but I'm going to leave it a little more open than our previous jaunt into the 70s. So get your Wayback Machine ready, kids, because we're going to be talking about comedies of the 1970s.
Oh.
And that was a very interesting decade, I think,
Yes,
for pushing some envelopes.
and some, um, shall we say, movies that probably would never get greenlit today.
And some that would.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, yep. So that's our assignment. Comedy films from the 1970s.
Hmm. All right. Oh, I definitely have some. I have some oldies but goodies to pull out of this vault. I think this will be good.
I think so too. It's going to be less of a, you know, look at just trying to be as esoteric as possible, and more of a, um, I think, a look into our souls as far as what we find funny.
It's true. I do notice that you can really glean a lot about a person based on what they find funny, or maybe not what they find funny, but the genres of humor that they are attracted to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it is, I think it is actually very telling. So this should be good. This should be very good. Do you have any predictions?
Let's see. Uh, For you,
Yeah.
well, I imagine. There's going to be maybe a couple of horror movies that aren't super widely known.
But they would have to be funny.
It,
Are you saying
intentionally or unintentionally.
but you say comedy? They have to
Yes,
be
comedy.
comedic. Yeah, yeah.
I imagine we're going to see some of the heavy hitting comedy names of that time appear at least once.
Yeah, I think my list will surprise you. I definitely think my list will surprise you. In a good way, in a very good way.
Hopefully, mine will do the same to you.
I have a feeling I have a feeling that this will definitely be a good list. Super good. I'm excited now.
So take notes, kids. If you're not familiar with the '70s and you like comedy, this is going to be the episode to really pay attention to.
We'll try to give a little bit of exposition for each movie, definitely, since these are older movies that probably not everybody has seen. So,
Oh, I imagine that even you might see a few on my list and be like, I don't know what that is.
mm, that's always good, by the way. I definitely like that. So, all right, sounds good.
You know what else sounds good?
What else sounds good?
Finding about how the month of Halloween spooky stuff went when it comes to preparing movies and meals based on our favorite spooky movies and TV shows.
Well, so we're going to be transitioning the site over to festive Thanksgiving and Christmas stuff very soon here. We'll leave the Halloween stuff up for a little while longer because it was really popular. Holy smokes. I can't believe the number of people that eat and people that like wrote me specifically to ask for movies that they were going to watch and what they should eat with them. That was super cool. So we made a whole bunch of recipes for people. But in the next probably week or so, we'll transition over to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it will be super festive. So, all of your favorite Christmas movies, all of your favorite Thanksgiving movies, we will definitely be doing some interesting things for them. But if you want some Halloween stuff for right now, you can still head over to moviesandmeals.com and see what we have going. It was a really fun year this year. So thank you everybody that participated. How can we find all things Wadgo Media, Josh?
Well, as always, if you're interested in what's going on at Wadco Media, you go to wadcomedia.com for all of the links that you need to get to the Facebooks and other social medias. If you want to throw down some ducats to sort of support the cause of what we do here, there's a Patreon. Ignore that. And head on over to the merch page. Not that we get more money for it because we don't. I would much rather have you have something tangible in your hands to hold for the money that you spend. That's exactly it. So if you want to get a T-shirt, by all means, go grab a T-shirt. Let the world know that you're into the 1021 show. That's the 1021 podcast, the internet's favorite movie centric list making podcast with me, Josh, and Lady Jen over there. WatchGoMedia.com. That's that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Sounds exciting.
Whew. We did the lists, we did the plugs, and I guess really there's only one thing left to do, Jen,
Let me guess. Can I guess?
if you want.
Okay. Say goodnight, Josh.
Good night, Josh.